I, like many, really miss Sega, especially the years where they were a hardware manufacturer, and despite their issues throughout the 90s into the early 2000s, releasing too much hardware, poor internal communication, I think we can all agree the Dreamcast kind of got the short end of the stick, and it really died an untimely and too soon death, but it did open up things in the 6th gen for Sega to really flourish as a third-party developer, and they really had great exclusives on each system in that generation. The GameCube, the Xbox, of course, which I did a video deep diving into that rabbit hole and covered many Sega games, so check that video out, but also, of course, the PS2, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And I picked out 12 games here that are all Sega published, huge variance in genres and types of games on offer, and I just want to show you guys what Sega put out during this generation on the PlayStation. So let's get into it. As per usual, guys, you know the drill. There's no real ranked order here, so we're just gonna go alphabetically, and that, funny enough, means we start with this game, and that is Britney's Dance Beat. Now, I should say, you're probably like, wait, why is Sega involved in this? Well, this was published by THQ in America as well as Japan. This was actually co-published with THQ. Typically in Japan, it's very a nationalistic kind of thing. They tend to want to support and buy games that are by companies from their region, right? It's very much like us in the US wanting to buy stuff that's like made in America, although that like never happens anymore. But same general concept here. So Sega was actually asked to help publish this in Japan, and technically that makes this a Sega game. Now, this is a rhythm game, and it's actually quite good, despite what you might think. This is by Metro Corporation, who are probably most famous for the Busta Groove games on the PS1, if you guys have played those. This one is essentially kind of a Busta Groove successor, and it is different gameplay-wise. You actually use like this radial dial for your rhythm inputs, and it's surprisingly kind of deep and complex, kind of challenging. I will say the downside to this is that, I mean, either you're into the music or you're not, but especially because there are only 5 songs in this, the game actually does short and full versions of each of those 5 tracks. So you get like 10 stages total, but you end up hearing each song at a minimum twice, if not more if you fail. I will say also the difficulty in this one does tend to scale up, although once you've played it once or twice, you can easily beat this game in under an hour. There is some fun little extras, but mostly this is kind of a lightweight game, but honestly kind of fun and just fascinating that it was Sega published. And obviously with the Dreamcast death being pretty quick in 2001, of course Sega wanted to port some of their great arcade games that made it to the Dreamcast and kind of give them another life additionally on the PS2, and of course we had to have some Crazy Taxi here. I honestly don't know the story behind these being published by Acclaim. The next game up also was co-published by Acclaim, but I mean, these are Sega games, right? It's Crazy Taxi, and this is essentially just, you know, the Dreamcast version of Crazy Taxi put on the PS2. It's an absolute classic of a game. I freaking love Crazy Taxi. I think this to me is like a desert island style game. I couldn't see myself living without this one in my collection. So there are other versions, other ports of the game that are better for certain reasons, but honestly, this is a pretty cheap version. You can get it for like 10 bucks. It's a solid experience if you just want that Crazy Taxi, quick pick up and play arcade experience. Still got the Offspring music. Hard to go wrong with this one. And continuing with the arcade driving theme, I'm putting these two together because they are very, very similar, and that is King of Route 66 and 18-wheeler American Pro Trucker. Now, this one did come first. This also had a Dreamcast port, once again published by Acclaim. Not sure why. This is once again very, very similar to the Dreamcast version. It really just feels like they ported it over to the PS2, but that's absolutely fine. This is a truck driving game that is very arcade-centric. You might think, man, truck driving, that would be kind of slow and boring. No, dude, this is pedal to the metal, super fun, very quick, short bursts. I mean, we're talking like this is only 4 stages. You can beat this game pretty quickly, although it does get pretty challenging. The Las Vegas map especially is quite tough, but yeah, overall, this is a really fun game. One of my favorites on the Dreamcast. Get the PS2 version. It's fairly affordable. Honestly, I would say pick this one up, but really my recommendation solidly goes to King of Route 66 because this basically takes what 18-wheeler was trying to do and really amping it up to 11, adding tons more content. This has a full-on story mode, many more missions. You have trailers that you can swap out, park into, and hitch. overall, this one feels like the much more complete package. This is the one I would recommend people pick up if, you know, they want something that is a little bit more of a fully fleshed out version of what 18-Wheeler was trying to accomplish. This is an absolutely fantastic game and probably one of my favorites on the PS2 in general. Next up, we got a fighting game with Guilty Gear XX/ The Midnight Carnival. Sorry, I had to look at the freaking art for this because the title is insane and the spine is in Japanese because this is an import version. This is a really great fighting game. Obviously, if you're aware of the Guilty Gear games, you know these are like borderline pinnacle 2D fighting games, right? Sans maybe Street Fighter 2. Absolutely love this franchise. I will say overall is phenomenal. Gorgeous visuals, plays really great, but the Achilles heel, and you might see it as a pro or a con depending on how you look at it, is the fact that this is very close to the arcade. This almost feels like a direct arcade port, and I say that might be a con because the difficulty plays like an arcade fighting game. The last boss in this I was unable to complete. I spent far too much time on it just to get repeatedly ruined, demolished over and over again. I mean, we're talking windows that are like only a couple frames wide. It's pulling that kind of stuff, so just want to warn people on that, but otherwise it is a phenomenally beautiful game, plays great, solid fighter. Maybe just play it multiplayer instead of trying to go through the solo arcade mode. That would be my recommendation. And this next one really to me distills why I tend to gravitate towards Sega's output during this generation, and that is Gungrave. This is a perfect kind of 6th gen experience. It takes a lot of that Sega arcade pick up and play, fast-paced magic, but also manages to add a little bit of that 6th gen feel. The longer playtime, the more enhanced story, a little bit more world building, those types of things that we were getting in the 6th gen, but not making like a bloated, overly long, drawn out action adventure game. This is like a good 2-hour little game, very good third-person shooter. Some great mechanics in this, solid movement, just super satisfying, doesn't overstay its welcome, has a great story, great visuals, fantastic art direction, just all around really enjoyable game. Unfortunately, it is a bit of a more premium title. It is exclusive. It hasn't been re-released, and there's been some renewed interest because there was a sequel on PS2 and then also the new Gungrave Gore and Gungrave VR. So this one's a little bit more desirable. I'm not sure I'd say it's fully worth crazy asking prices like what my sticker says here. I did not pay that. I did trade for it. Overall, if you can play it, definitely worth checking out. This next one took me a bit by surprise. Did you guys know the 2008 Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man movie, the great earlier Marvel film, got a Sega published PS2 tie-in game? Obviously, the 7th gen was more in vogue at this point, so there are PS3 and 360 versions of this. This version is extraordinarily cheap. I mean, we're talking like I paid like $6 or $8 to get this shipped to my door, and I picked it up on a whim. People told me it was going to be bad. I was actually quite taken aback by how fun this was. This is by a developer called Artificial Mind and Movement. You guys might know them now as Behavior Interactive. They're probably famous mostly now for like Dead by Daylight, but this was back when they were known as A2M, which they changed names for probably good reason. But yeah, this is a fun little game. It's certainly not going to win any awards. It's not phenomenal by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a fun little third-person action shooter, and what really took me by surprise most was the fact that the flying in this game was actually super satisfying. Like some of the best flying in a game like this that I've personally ever experienced, and I was like, what? This bargain bin little game has this super satisfying flying mechanics? Just recommend it for that alone. It's super fun to fly around. I did beat this game. It only took me like 3.5 hours, so it's a fun little, fairly bite-sized experience. I would recommend checking this one out. Honestly, if you keep your expectations kind of low and you consider the very low price of entry, I think you could have a good time with Iron Man. And we got another Dreamcast port here with Rez, although this one does get a little bit of an asterisk because we did not get this in America on the Dreamcast. I believe it was PAL and Japan exclusive. For a lot of us Americans, the PS2 was the first way for us to experience this game. And this is a fantastic little rail shooter, essentially. It's kind of hard to call it that. It kind of defies genre a little bit. It is one of the most striking games you will probably ever see. The soundtrack soundtrack is incredible. The graphical style, like I said, is unlike anything else before or since, which that alone I think requires a recommendation from me. It's just one of those games that you'll never have an experience quite like it, probably ever again. There is a VR version of this if you want to check out that. I can't even imagine trying to play this in VR. It's already kind of overwhelming just, you know, on a standard screen, but hey, if you're into that kind of thing, you can play it there. Honestly, just one that I think anyone that appreciates the art of video games should probably experience. Now, I gotta come clean on this next one. This one disappointed me a little bit, mostly because I think it wasn't exactly what I was bargaining for when I bought it, but that is Sega Bass Fishing Duel. This one is probably just about one of the cheapest PS2 games you can get. I got this for like $6 shipped on eBay. I have to imagine the person I bought it from probably paid most of the money they made on the shipping. I don't even know if they made any money, but hey, it was on eBay for that price. I bought it, so what can you do? This is obviously kind of a sequel to Sega Bass Fishing, which came out in the arcades and then got a Dreamcast port that is pretty well revered and loved. I think I wanted that experience, and instead this kind of tries to evolve that experience and make it, I'm not going to say a simulator, but definitely much more involved than I was expecting. You actually do have to go out on a boat and lull around, try to find spots with fish, and I don't know anything about freaking fishing like this, so you end up just hoping and praying that fish are gonna bite. It's a lot of waiting around, which I mean is what fishing is. So that being said, maybe worth a shot if you're really into fishing games. It seems more than competent in that regard, but I was hoping for a little bit more pick up and play, a little bit more action. Hey, Sega Bass Fishing Duel, it is a Sega game on the PS2. This next one I would honestly wholeheartedly recommend, but I do have to give it a caveat, and that is Space Channel 5 Special Edition. Now, if you guys aren't aware of this franchise, there were a couple games on the Dreamcast, that's where it debuted, and these are really fun rhythm games that have a very bright pastel color, just really wonky, unique, futuristic slant. Great music, super charming, lots of personality. Ulala, the main character here, is just super fun and happy-go-lucky, and it makes for a really enjoyable time. The problem is this PS2 version I have had tons of trouble with, and this was published by Age Tech alongside Sega. They're most known for games like Evergrace and Eternal Ring on the PS2. They brought over a lot of games from Japan that otherwise probably wouldn't have gotten releases, so I love them for that, and apparently they were in charge of porting this. I don't know what happened here necessarily. I know the Dreamcast version can be pretty tough. I mean, this is just a demanding game in general from a rhythm game standpoint. It's honestly one of the hardest ones I've played, and this version is extra hard. It seems to be almost inconsistent in its timings, which is a damn shame because otherwise this is a really fantastic rhythm game and has lots of charm and personality. Maybe depending on your setup, I don't think I have much in the way of latency in my personal gaming setup, so like I said, I have to give this one a caveat. It's definitely worth checking out in some form or fashion, but maybe look for a Dreamcast version or a modern re-release. Maybe not. This PS2 version might be more of a collector's item than anything. And to round off our list here today, I've got two Virtua Fighter games actually. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution as well as Virtua Fighter 10th Anniversary. If you guys aren't aware, I'm putting these together because 10th Anniversary is actually a Japanese exclusive kind of commemorative release to celebrate, you know, the 10th anniversary of the franchise, and it essentially just takes the Virtua Fighter 4 engine and kind of retrofits it with the older, lower polygon style character models. It's super fun release, not very expensive, but kind of cool collectible, and I think if you're a Virtua Fighter fan, this is worth checking out. But essentially, for all intents and purposes, it plays like Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution. I genuinely think this game is super slept on. I know Virtua Fighter is a bit divisive in the 3D fighting game community. People have their opinions on this franchise. I think especially a lot of that opinion comes from Virtua Fighter 1 and 2, which you gotta remember are very early 3D fighting games. Obviously, they aren't gonna be perfect. They are a little slow, a little more methodical. The gravity is a point of contention, right? It looks like you're jumping on the moon. This is, I would dare say, almost unrecognizable compared to those. This really stands toe-to-toe with its contemporaries. We're talking Tekken 4 and Dead or Alive 3. Like, I genuinely think it belongs in the conversation. The fluidity of the combat here, the move sets, the visuals. This is such a phenomenal game, and I think it deserves more praise than it gets. One of my favorite 3D fighting games, and if you haven't played it, I highly recommend at least giving it a shot. That will do it for our list today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know there's more Sega games on the PS2. I definitely want to cover more in the future. There are some I am aware of. Also, the Sega Ages line is something I would like to cover at some point, but I don't have too many of those yet, so hopefully one of these days I can get some more of those and do a comprehensive video on that line because it's super fascinating. But guys, I would love to hear your comments down below. What did I miss? What do you think about the games that I showed today? Take care and see you all very soon. I, like many